So we are on Perek Vav of Hilchas Shofar, Sukkah, and Lulav. The Rambam puts together the laws of Rosh Hashanah, and laws of Sukkah, and the laws of Lulav. So it's the holidays in the month of Tishrei, not Yom Kippur, that was separate. And we're continuing in Perek Vav, the laws of Sukkah. Okay, Perek Shishi Aleph, the first one. Noshev va'avadim v'ketanim p'turim min ha-sukkah. Women and slaves and children are exempt from the Sukkah. Sukkah is another one of what we call a mitzvah saseh shazman grama, a mitzvah which is time bound, and anything which is time bound, a lady and a slave or a maid servant would be pater, would be exempted from doing, and a child's exempted because they're underage. Tumtum and Tumtum and Androgynous are characters we've met throughout Rambam. They're individuals who are not certain if they are male or female due to their body, whether they have both or they have neither. So therefore, they're only obligated out of doubt, because perhaps they're male and they're obligated, perhaps they're female and they're not obligated. The same thing, somebody who's half a slave and half a free person. He also is chayiv, is obligated. How could you be half and half? If you were owned by a partnership and one partner lets you go free, so part of you is free and part of you is still owned by the other partner. A young child who does not need to eat, in other words, by his mother, he doesn't need to be constantly next to his mother. Once we start 5 or 6 year old child, the sages obligated him in Sukkah out of what we call chinuch. Chinuch is an education process which want the child to be able to learn how to do mitzvah. So when they turn bar ban mitzvah, they won't suddenly be dropped and overwhelmed, but they'll have an idea of what they've been doing. Base 2. Someone who's sick and those who are taking care of the sick individual are pater from a sukkah. They are exempted from eating in a sukkah. And not just someone who's sick in a deathly ill. In other words, yesh sakana, who is a certain level of severe sickness. Even if he just has a headache or an eye ache, is also exempt from the sukkah. Why is that? So perhaps it's based on the next line, mitztayer pater min ha-sukkah, because someone who has tsar doesn't feel comfortable in a painful way when they're in the sukkah, is also exempt from the sukkah. And therefore, perhaps these people have headaches and they're not able to go out to the sukkah. Because of that, would also be pater, would be exempt. Ahu v'lo mishamshav. But he's pater, but not those who are helping him. In other words, if somebody is actually ill and needs to be taken care of, so the people to helping them are also exempt. If you're not actually ill, you're just mitzvah, just have some pain, then those who are helping you should take turns and rotate out to go eat in the sukkah. Then the Rambam continues, who is considered someone who's in pain from being in the sukkah? Somebody who cannot sleep at night in the sukkah. So we know there's an obligation to sleep in the sukkah. This individual cannot do so because of the ruach, the bad odor, or because of the mosquitoes, the fleas, the bugs, etc. He cannot stay in the sukkah. I'm sorry, the first time I said ruach. Ruach is the wind. It was too windy, it was too cold. The last one's because it is scent, because of the unpleasant scent. So in other words, it doesn't need to literally be that there's some sukkah that's actually paining you, but as long as it's causing such a level of uncomfortability. And the thought process is the following. If I was sitting in a room in my house and there was something happening which caused me to be uncomfortable, I would leave that room. If that's the case, the same thing applies to the sukkah, and I would also be able to leave it and go into the house. Gimel. Number 3, ha'avel, someone who's, Rahman al-San, God forbid, sitting shiva. He's a mourner. Chayav b'sukkah, he still is obligated in the sukkah. V'chasan v'chol shushvina v'chol b'nei chuppah. On the other hand, a chasan, someone who just got married, and all of the wedding party, if you wish, and the people who are involved in the chuppah and the ceremony under the canopy, b'turmin sukkah, and they can eat and drink under the chuppah. So if you're making a chuppah outside of sukkah, technically they can drink a cup of wine, and they can celebrate there as well. Kol Shivas Yimei Mishta, only during the 7 days of Sheva Brachas, the 7 days afterwards, where we have celebratory meals and eating. So, in other words, they're involved in a mitzvah. The mitzvah is in the chuppah, therefore they can eat there. We don't make them go to the sukkah. On the other hand, somebody who's an avel, it's more in his mind, the ability that doesn't allow him to want to leave his house and go to the sukkah. So we say there you have a mitzvah, you should be able to go do that. And Dalit, number 4, shluchei mitzvah. People who are being sent out to do a mitzvah, to buy something for the community, to do any number of mitzvahs, pidyon shvuyim, to go learn Torah somewhere, to go redeem a captive, etc. Both day and night. We don't make them go find a sukkah. In other words, don't go off the path. Go straight to accomplish your mitzvah. Another than an average person who's traveling by yom during the day, by yom b'chayavim balayla. A person who's traveling during the day has a 9-to-5 job traveling, so he is putter during the day, but chayav he's obligated at night. Because during the year, again, the same logic as before. He leaves his house. He's on the road. He eats out of his road. But once he comes home at night, he's back in his house. Same thing would apply here. On the other hand, people who travel, nighttime truck drivers, if you wish, that's the opposite. They're exempt from the sukkah at night because that's when they're used to being out on the road. But they're obligated during the day when they'll be back home. Shomrei ha'ir, those who watch the city, the guards, by yom during the day, by yom the same thing, they're obligated only at nighttime when they'd be home, but during their guard duty, they're not during the day. And Shomrei ha'ir balayla, on the flip side, those who guard the night duty, are exempt from the sukkah at night, and they're obligated during the day. Shomrei ganos uperdostin, those who guard orchards or gardens, we say that they're exempt both day and night. Why do we say that by these people? So it's an interesting thing the Rambam says. Shinyasa hashomer sukkah, that if this guard will go ahead and build the sukkah, Yalda Haganav, the thief, will know sheyesh l'shomer makom kavua, so he knows where the guard is. The guard's sitting in the sukkah. So therefore I can go steal at the other side of the field and there won't be no guard. So we say you don't need to kind of advertise where you are. So the thief will think you're constantly around. We don't know where you are. And therefore we made him exempt from the sukkah day and night. Hey, now the Rambam says, okay, these are the people who are obligated or exempt from the sukkah. But what does it mean for you and I to be obligated? What is the obligation? What is the mitzvah sitting in the sukkah? You should eat, you should drink, you should live in the sukkah for 7 days, day and night, just like you live in your house all the rest of the days of the year. And we learned this out from Teshuvu Ke'in Taduru, that it says you should sit in the sukkah just like you sit in your home. Which actually is a very short, little interesting story. There's a rabbi in a town who didn't know how to build a sukkah, and he went to his landlord, and his landlord built a sukkah for him. And the landlord comes over to him the first day of the holiday, right before the holiday, and says, you owe me money, you got to pay up. And the rabbi says, I don't have the money. So the landlord knew a little bit of something, and he said, it has to be your sukkah. Lachem, it has to be your sukkah. If you don't pay up, it's my sukkah. You can't fulfill your obligation in the sukkah. So the rabbi smiled and says, Teshuva Kein Tadura, you're supposed to live in the sukkah the same way you live in your house. And just like I'm behind in my rent for the house, I can be behind in my rent for the sukkah. Obviously, they made it up and they both shared sukkah together. But the classic story of a rabbi in Baproisk back in the old days. In any event, the all 7 days of the holiday, person should make his house secondary and his sukkah primary. That his primary residence should be in the sukkah. Because it says in the verse in the pasuk, you should sit in the sukkah for 7 days. Ketzah, what does this mean? Kalim hanaim u'matzois hanais basukah, that your nice vessels and your nice tablecloths and everything that you use nice in your dining room for a festive meal should be in the sukkah. And wine glasses and other fancy glasses that you drink with, you should have in the sukkah. Containers for kairos, but regular plates and regular pots and pans should be outside the sukkah, which means that as soon as you finish eating, you should take them out of the sukkah. And even pots, there's a debate if you're allowed to bring them into the sukkah. Most opinions are you can bring them in to serve, but you shouldn't leave them around because that's not what you would have in your home in a nice dining room, that you wouldn't be walking around with pots, pans, and other things. You're leaving leftover dirty dishes around. Your sukkah should be treated the same way. The menorah, you have a menorah. Now, we don't need a menorah for Hanukkah here. We need a candelabra to have light. But sukkah should be in the sukkah. Sukkah ketana. Now, if you had a small sukkah, manicha chutz sukkah, then you should place your candelabra, which in those days was candles or oil burning, outside your sukkah. And there's a very practical reason, because if I put it inside a small sukkah, it might catch fire to the walls or to the roof above, which is chach, which might be hanging down. We don't want obviously a fire. So if you have a large sukkah, and it's a safe way to put your candelabra, and then you can enjoy your meal, because without the light, you won't enjoy your meal. But if it's fire hazard, put it outside. Vav 6. You eat and you drink and you sleep in the sukkah all 7. Day or night. And you're forbidden to eat any meal outside the sukkah, unless you're eating what's called a temporary meal, which is like a size of an egg, which is about 2 ounces roughly, or a little bit more, a little bit less, but somewhere around a kabeya, somewhere around that, a measurement, like 2 ounces, is considered a temporary meal. It's a snack. So a snack you can eat because you eat snacks anywhere. But a meal, to sit down, you should have this. Now, you should eat in the sukkah. Other people highlighted here, and this is going to say it, is going to highlight a little bit in the next line about what kind of foods, that some people say that if it's a mezonot, if you make the bracha mezonot, so it's a wheat-based cookie, cracker, cake, then you should probably try to have it in the sukkah. But fruit and vegetables, as we read in the next line, the water would be outside the sukkah. He says, but taking a nap, you can't do outside the sukkah, even a nap. So a real meal, you can't do outside the sukkah, but a snack you can. Here he says about sleeping, even a nap you shouldn't do outside the sukkah, because a nap can very easily turn into a real long sleep. But a snack doesn't turn into a whole meal. You can drink water and eat fruit outside the sukkah. If somebody is machmir, strict, stringent upon himself, it does not drink even water outside the sukkah, it's praiseworthy, because ultimately, for the short duration of the time, you should do all that you can to continuously be inside the sukkah. That is actually the Chabad custom, that we don't drink even water outside the sukkah for all the days of Sukkot. Eating the first holiday in a sukkah, cholva, it's an obligation. Even if you ate a kazayis, which is the amount to fulfill a mitzvah, like an ounce of bread, you fulfilled your obligation. Mikan ve'elech, from that night and on, this first day onward, it's rishus, it's only voluntary. Ratza lechom suda. So in Sukkah, if you want to sit down and eat a meal, you got to eat it in the Sukkah. Ratza in eichel kol shiva leperes, it clears chutz Sukkah. Or if you want to, you can only eat fruit or other kind of snack foods. It's like some kind of a wheat dish here, but it's not a mezonot. It's more like some kind of snack dish that they had, the kliyot. So those things you can eat chutz sukkah ochel, so that you can eat. So in other words, throughout the rest of the week, if you want to sit down and eat a whole meal, you need to wash it, go into the sukkah, and eat your proper meal. But if you don't want to eat a meal, you can snack all day, eat fruit and drink water. That you can do outside the sukkah. But the very first night, you're obligated to eat in the sukkah. at least a kazayit, a bread. And we'll see later how that plays out into practical questions. But the Rambam concludes, just like the first night of Pesach, there is an obligation to eat matzah. The rest of the days of Pesach, there is no obligation to eat matzah. But if you're going to wash and you want to have a meal that you don't have bread, you got to eat matzah. But if you want to, you don't have to eat matzah. Same thing here about Sukkah. And that's because we learned about from the same verse, so the Rambam highlights the connection. Ches, number 8. If somebody had his head and the majority of his body inside the sukkah, but his table was inside the house, or outside the sukkah in general, and he ate, you're forbidden to do this. So if it's a small sukkah and I can squeeze part of me in, I put my table outside, the Rambam says don't do that. It's as if you did not eat in the sukkah. Under your table, it's inside the sukkah. And the reason is, Gezerah, we're concerned, maybe you will naturally follow your table. You lean towards your table, you want food off the table. So if your table is outside the sukkah, it will lead you to be outside the sukkah. Even if it's a tremendously large sukkah and you want to put the table outside, the Rambam says don't do that. Even though I have plenty of space to be comfortable inside my sukkah, the Rambam still says don't, because your natural habit will be to follow your table. Test number 9. All 7 days of Sukkah, you should read, you should learn inside the Sukkah. And when you understand, sorry about that. Everyone's still there. I don't know why it just flashed off here. She had died to Mishevis Alav, and in order to have, if your sukkah is too small and it will not allow you to be able to comfortably learn, then you can do that outside the sukkah. Mispalel, if someone's davening, davening, if you want to, you can either do it inside your sukkah or outside your sukkah. All depends on where you'll be able to have more concentration to daven properly. Yud, Yardu Yishamim, it started to rain, or it's raining. It's a night that it's raining. You can go into your house. When is it considered rain to go into your house? The drops, so much water comes into your sukkah, that if it falls into your dish will become ruined. Certain, a little bit of rain, drops of water on a piece of chicken aren't going to ruin it. But if too much water starts to come down, the plate's going to be ruined, and that you can go into the house. If it was raining in your dining room, you'd go in your kitchen. Same thing here. If it's raining in your sukkah, you go into your house. But even if it's the beans, which get ruined very quickly, the Rambam says you can rely on that. As soon as it gets ruined, you can go inside. If you were eating in the sukkah and it began to rain, so you pack up, you go into your house to finish your meal, and then it stops raining. We don't demand that you go back to the sukkah to finish your meal. If it was starting to, if you were sleeping at night in the sukkah and it began to rain, and then you got up and went into the house to finish sleeping, for the rest of that night, you don't need to go back to the sukkah. You're done for the night, even though the rain stopped. And even though there's hours later, once you already got up and left the sukkah because of the rain and get into the house, you can stay there. You sleep in your house until the morning comes up, and officially then you get up, you go to shul, you're going to start your day anyways. Yud Aleph, number 11. The seventh day of Sukkot. Now, we know that Sukkot at Tishu Shivat Yamim Sukkot lasts Minat Torah only 7 days, as it is in Israel. Outside of Israel, we have 8 days, which we'll learn about in a minute, because it is a doubt of whether the first day is the first day or the second day is the first day. But in Israel or Minat Torah, we have 7 days. So you finished eating on the 7th day in the morning. Lo yatis, because they don't take your sukkah down. Why? Because you still have an obligation. If you're going to eat a meal the rest of that day, it must be in the sukkah. The sukkah obligation is all 7 days. I'm married who has kelim and fanosim and mincha lamayla, but you can go ahead and take it down as a mincha time in the afternoon. You can take some of your dishes inside. Eloi mokum lifnois, if you don't have a place to take them to. Peiches ba arba al arba. So you should open up a piece of schach that's 4 by 4, thereby invalidating the sukkah. Okay? But the Rambam just wants you to know, you should just know either way. Even after technically the afternoon begins, and I just told you you're allowed to open up and invalidate the sukkah. We'll talk about that in a second why. Or you're allowed to already begin going into the house. Technically, your obligation to eat the Sarich Lachal Sukkah has to be in the Sukkah mitzvah called Shiva, that the mitzvah extends for all 7 days. Now, here's part of the challenge. What do we do with the 8th day? The 8th day, technically in Israel, you're not allowed. You shouldn't eat in the sukkah because then you're saying I'm doing an extra day of the mitzvah, and there's no mitzvah to be on the 8th day. And in America, there's a whole debate what to do. There's various customs. Some people eat in the sukkah and don't make a bracha. That's what everybody agrees. Some people make kiddush in the sukkah and go back into the house. Some people don't eat in the sukkah at all on the 8th day, like in Israel. But the bottom line is that there's this whole debate going on, and the Rambam says that technically speaking, if you leave the sukkah up like regular, and you leave everything in the sukkah, and you eat there, so it looks like you feel that you want to add on to the mitzvah an extra day, and that you're not allowed to do, especially because Shmini Atzeret, while being called the 8th day of sukkah, has a complete mitzvah of its own, which is why we say Shechianu. It's a holiday of its own, and therefore we don't eat in the sukkah. So now you're kind of confusing this by saying, no, I think Shmini Atzeret I should eat in the sukkah. So you're kind of devaluing Shmini Atzeret, and you're extending to the mitzvah, which we're not allowed to do either. So you're kind of torn between the two things. In America, we're kind of stuck in flux because we don't know which day it is. But inside Israel, as Rambam saying, we got to be sensitive to what's playing out here with the 8th day. Yud Beis 12. Throughout the time that the 7 days, whenever you go into the sukkah to eat, the Rambam says before you sit down, you go ahead and you make a bracha, and he's given us the mitzvah to sit in the sukkah. Now, most of us nowadays halachically know that we don't make it before we sit down, but we make it before we eat. We connect it to eating because eating is considered sitting and dwelling. And technically, even on a holiday in the sukkah, we don't say it by kiddush, we say it by hamotzi. Shulchan Aruch discusses why that is, if it should be at the beginning of the meal. But here the Rambam says something interesting. When you're making kiddush the first night, the Rambam's going to elaborate slightly more on this in a moment. You make first the bracha on the sukkah and then the shechianu. Now you may remember that the first night of sukkah we say Leisha Basukah and then Shechianu. And the second night of Sukkah, we say Shechianu first and then Leisha Basukah. And the Rambam says wine. You should organize all your brachot that we're saying on the cup of wine. Nimsa Mekadesh Mu'umet. So it turns out that you make Kiddush standing up. Then you say Leisha Basukah and you sit down. And after that, you make the Shechianu for the holiday. This was the custom of my teachers, Rabbanei Tzvara, and the Sephardic teachers, to make Kiddush the first night of Sukkot standing up, and then to sit down for the Leisha Sukkah, and then to say the Shechianu after that. So the Rabbi is sharing with you that this was the custom of his teachers and Sephardic rabbis going back in time. Yud Gimel. These days that we make 2 days of the holiday. Yoshim b'Sukkah Shmoni Yomim, we sit in the Sukkah 8 days, like I was telling you before. Why? Of Yom HaShmini, because, not why either, I'm going to continue. Why? Because we don't know what it is. We don't know if it's the first, if it's the 7th from the second day, then I need to be in the Sukkah. If it's the 8th from the first, then I don't need to be in the Sukkah. So you sit in the Sukkah, of Yom HaShmini, Yom Tov Rishon Shel Shmini Atzeret, and then the first and the day of Shmini Atzeret, which in America we have 2 days of Shmini Atzeret, one we call Simchat Torah. Yoshua, the first day we sit in it, but we do not make a bracha because it is stout, and not to devalue Shmini Atzeret, which is a standalone holiday too. And similarly, these characters we've discussed earlier, we don't know if they're male or female. And the Rambam said they're chayiv to eat in the sukkah. They have an obligation because perhaps they are male. Nonetheless, they never make a bracha. Because this case, like Shmini Atzeret, is set up out of doubt. And out of doubt, you don't make a bracha. Your 14. Government lachal b'yom hashmini, when a person finishes eating on the 8th day. Married Caleb Mufano, so then he can take his dishes and go into the house. Now, this is for someone in America who's eating. In Israel, you're not eating in the 8th day in the sukkah. Here you are eating on Shmini Atzeret in the sukkah, you can take your stuff in. If you don't have a place to put your dishes inside the house for some reason, it's if it was a small sukkah, you should bring your menorah into it. The commentators explain you bring your candelabra after it went out. Just like we said before, that really you shouldn't have dishes that have no value in the sukkah because it should be nice and it should be royal and it should be regal. So if a candelabra that's empty doesn't look good, so if I bring that in afterwards, I'm making a statement that I'm using this not because of the mitzvah of sukkah, because if it was the mitzvah of sukkah, I couldn't bring my candelabra in after it's empty, after it's extinguished. But if it's a large sukkah, bringing in your small candelabra may not make the statement. So bring in your pots and your pans and put them in the sukkah to make a statement that I'm using the sukkah because I need the space, not because of the mitzvah. In order to show you that it's possible, that it's not a kosher sukkah, I'm not using it as a kosher sukkah, and your mitzvah is already fulfilled. Interesting commentaries here. The Rambam says, lahakir psula, to say that it's actually possible, it's invalid. The sukkah is no good. Does that mean that if I decide to bring my pots and pans or leave my dirty dishes in the sukkah, that the whole sukkah becomes invalidated? And it's a debate among the commentators, and mostly the Rambam doesn't literally mean that. It just wants to say, to show that it doesn't have the value of being a kosher sukkah. I'm not treating it that way because I don't see it that way presently. But not that if you leave a pot and pan in your sukkah, your entire sukkah becomes invalidated, although there seems to be one or two opinions you say that, but doesn't seem not the accepted opinion. But now you can't do the other option that the Rambam said, which was to make a hole in the schach of 4x4, which would invalidate the sukkah by having such a large hole in it, because it's Yom Tov. You can't do that on the holiday itself. Tezvav, if a person never made a sukkah, for whatever reason, shogeg amazing, intentionally, unintentionally, forgot, whatever the reason is. He can make his sukkah on the days of Cholamot. Cholamot are the days in between the two sets of holidays, which we have some leniencies of work, and you're allowed to build certain things, and you're allowed to build your sukkah then, the Rambam says. And even in the end of the 7th day, when you still have an obligation of a sukkah, and you need a sukkah, and you don't have one, you can build one then. Because the mitzvah of the sukkah is for all 7 days. In other words, Rambam saying the sukkah does not need to be up the entirety of the 7 days. Rather, the sukkah needs to be used during the 7 days, and you can even build one all the way up until the end if you need it. The boards of the sukkah, the wood of the sukkah. The Rambam says, whether they're wood that makes the walls, which those days often they have wooden walls, but we've learned not all, but let's say it was a wooden wall. Whether it was wood used for the schach on the roof, right, the branches. You're not allowed to have any benefit from them for these 8 days, which means if I take down my sukkah in the middle of Chol on the 4th day, I cannot treat that wood, whether the walls, whether the schach, in a disrespectful way. I can't have any benefit from it. Why? Because and all the way up until the end of the 7th day, the sukkah was called muksa. Now, muksa is a term we learned in Shabbat, where something is set aside and I can't use it. Here, the Rambam is using the same term. Since his sukkah was set aside for the 8th day, it's set aside for the entire 8th day. In other words, when I took the walls, the wood, and I made it walls for the sukkah, I'm a muksa. I'm setting these walls aside to say that for the sukkah. So the entire time the sukkah exists, or can exist, which is an entire holiday. This wood was taken out of my mind for usage, except for the holiday. So I can't now take it back and use it for something random. Now, again, if I had intention, saying I'm building a sukkah only for 2 days, and the wood is not being set aside except for 2 days, that might be a different scenario. But in a normal case that I built a sukkah, and if for some reason I take it down early, or a branch of schach falls off, you can't pick up the branch, you go use it to roast a marshmallow, because you cannot have benefit for it during the days of sukkah, during all 8 days here in America. But technically in Israel too, the Rambam says, because it's a holiday, once the holiday begins and it's set aside for Sukkah, so you have to finish the day of the holiday. So both here in America would probably be 9 days because of the holiday, in Israel 8 days because of the holiday, but the bottom line is it's set aside. And this plays off into some interesting questions. Tezayin, the next halacha. Many people hang food, gourds, or other food actual items, or mashkin and shrinks in the sukkah in order to lenausa, what we call noi sukkah, to beautify the sukkah. So let's say you took a beautiful dish of olive oil and you hung it up in the sukkah to show your beauty. Also, this topic, you're not allowed to touch it for those 8 days. Because since I had in mind that it's becoming part of the sukkah, it becomes muksa, set aside, and I cannot benefit until after the holiday. But if I set them up and I had in mind intention to say that I'm not removing myself I'm not refraining from having benefit from them. I'm allowing myself to continue to benefit. Then you're allowed to make use of them, because as I said before, my intention is what sets it aside. Normally, you put it in a sukkah, you put it there for the whole sukkah, it becomes part of the sukkah, it's set aside, you cannot go ahead and use it. But if my intention says that I'm not putting it aside for the whole sukkah, just for a certain time, then I can use it. In the case that the Rambam says, I said that as this holiday begins, as the time period of Ben Hashmasha, which is like we learn in Shabbat, when something becomes muksa during that time, it becomes set muksa for the rest of Shabbat. Since during the time it began, I had in mind that I was going to use it and allow myself to benefit from it. It never became muksa at that time, so therefore it never became muksa for the entirety of the holiday. But if I don't have that intention, it becomes muksa, set aside for that time, and thereby set aside and muksa for the entire holiday, and I can no longer benefit from the food or drink that I put up for things. And there's some who say that's why some people have a custom of not putting up food or drink or anything else I might have benefit from as my sukkah decorations and ornaments. And some may even imply that may be why some people don't do it at all, because they're concerned that it'll fall down, someone might benefit from it, etc. But that's kind of a further conversation. Majority custom in the world is to hang things, but to know that we don't have benefit from them unless you deliberately intended to. Chabad's custom actually is not to hang anything to benefit, but that's for a different conversation. And with that, we finish Perek Vav, the 6th chapter.
Thanks, Rabbi. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. You all.